Hi. It still feels really awkward filming these, but it's also quite fun as well, putting it together. I like that I get to sort of reflect upon all the collages of things that I have been consuming and then, investigate why I liked them and see the thematic overlays, and like what piques my interest about certain things. It's been quite fun. It's a nice exercise as well, trying to get yourself to like speak out your thoughts, and especially on camera to people. But it's quite fun and I've really been enjoying it. And it's also cool because in real life, like I'll get messages as well, friends telling me like what they enjoyed about it, or like also like, hey, I read that thing, or I also watched that show and this is what I thought about it. I think that's probably been the coolest part about this as well. So it's sort of building upon itself. Okay, so the first thing I want to talk about is this show called Girlfriends. It's an American TV show from the early 2000s, and it pretty much centers around 4 black women in LA, and it talks about basically just their daily life, and it's centered around the main character Joan, played by Tracee Ellis Ross. It's just such a good TV show. I actually watched and finished this whole show for the first time when I was in high school. I think I was 17 or so, but I've forgotten. It's so long ago since I watched the show. It's available on American Netflix, so I've just been watching it through a VPN. But the thing that it's really made me think about is obviously the central theme about friendship, and especially female friendships. I'm actually quite surprised relearning the level of depth within the show. So as much as like I've enjoyed the show and the fashion, these women are so beautiful, and they like the fashion is amazing, and the style, and they're all so stylish, and like the set design and the styling and everything is like so good in the show. It's fantastic. So as much as I've been enjoying the aesthetics of the show, but I've also really been enjoying the themes of the show. And of course the overarching theme, as suggested by the title, is about friendship, and more so female friendship, and how it's really made me reflect a lot about this thesis, which isn't a new idea at all, but this idea of how friendships are really the most enduring relationships that we will ever have outside of the relationships that we form with ourselves. And so it's really made me think a lot about how, in contrast to romantic relationships, which in Western culture are kind of framed like if there's like a hierarchy, speaking that like romantic relationships are at the top and then friendships kind of come second to that. The show mainly follows around Joan and her friends. She's like the main character, played by Tracee Ellis Ross, like I mentioned. Basically, her biggest pursuit throughout the show is about romantic relationships, and how she starts off the same age I am now, which is 26, and how she kind of had envisioned this life for herself centered around her pursuit of romantic love and romantic relationship. And how I suppose the underlying message of the underlying message of the show is that she already has her friends, which kind of are probably the greatest love that she could have in her life, and how her pursuit of romantic love is kind of null and void if she doesn't appreciate the kind of core friendship that she has. Because from her perspective, once she completes the pursuit of romantic love, she'll then view herself and her life as finally being complete, and that her happiness will only be attained once she attains romantic love. That has really made me think a lot about this thesis, which isn't a very new thing at all, but it's about how outside of the relationship we will have with ourselves, relationally speaking, our friendships will be probably the greatest romance of our life, actually. They're probably the ones that are the least conditional and the most enduring. And I saw this tweet from this guy. Actually, let me pull it up. I saw this tweet. It is meant to be like funny, and it got like quite a lot of engagement. It showed up on my timeline. It's pretty much this guy who went to Paris with his friend, and he's basically making fun of himself, like being self-deprecating in a way, of being like, I have no girlfriend, so I took my mate to Paris and I took all these photos that like look romantic, or things like that. And he's kind of like poking fun at himself. But it made me think about why it's funny, you know what I mean? Like, why is it weird for you to like go and do all of these things with your roommate or your friend? I'm sure it's been written a lot about as well. This isn't a new idea of like reframing platonic relationships or friendships, and as just as important as we do our pursuit of romantic love, and why in Western culture romantic love is placed like at the pinnacle or at the top. One of the essays I stumbled upon while thinking about this is called Treasure Them, and it's by Anna Machin. She is an anthropologist and a philosopher, and she wrote this, I think 2021, this article. And it's interesting because there's been this statistic that's been talked about a lot lately of how who is actually happier in relationships, men or women, and how in relationships, like romantic partnerships, especially heterosexual romantic partnerships, the men do really, really well under partnership, but women, statistically speaking, report far more levels of unhappiness than men. And so in the essay, basically she talks a lot about friendship from an anthropologist kind of view, and then she also talks a lot about the evidence-based research that talks about just how people who have really enriched and positive social networks actually exponentially, are just better and happier in every way. In the Western framing, there is like a hierarchy of relationships that we put. So firstly, it becomes like parental love, and then after parental love, it becomes romantic love, and after romantic love, it's familial love, so love from our family, and then after that, it becomes friendships. Like friendship is usually like the bottom tier, or at least the second to last bottom tier, and why that is. But when the evidence that we see is actually people who have really enriched chosen family in friendships, actually far much healthier, far much happier as well, and much more successful in multiple facets of their life. So if the evidence is saying that our friendships are actually what enrich us the most, but culturally speaking, the messaging is that romantic relationships are what are most fulfilling. Why is that? And so she's kind of going back and forth in the essay, trying to surmise about all of this. And so I've also been interested in like how this kind of structure or hierarchy came about, where we do place sort of romantic love as above friendship, or like not seeing them as equal, and how we reframe that. This hierarchy only exists pretty much mainly as a result of the age of romanticism that we're in. So pretty much romanticism came about towards about the end of the 18th century. So it's only been about 200 years where this idea of like how you find romantic love, you have to be led only by your heart, and how the pursuit of like marriage or any kind of partnership should firstly be guided by emotion and feeling. Whereas actually that's a relatively new thing in human history, or human civilization, of us being led by our hearts and like love and feeling in order to like find a partner. Whereas actually before that, within human history, for most of human history, it's been more dynastic, meaning that people came together through arrangement either by the village or by family or by court, and it had nothing to do at all with romanticism or with feeling or with anything like that. It was just more so purely to do with economics, cultural background, religious background, and pretty much whether you guys made sense on paper. And so this philosopher, I'll link the video here of why he's talking about how he's talking about how this idea kind of emerged and whether or not it's helping us culturally or not. This is a completely different topic, but it was really interesting, and it was quite short as well. Pretty much this hierarchy between friendship and romance has come about only as of lately, and also as a result of this era of romanticism that we're in. And then it just made me more introspective even watching the show as well. It's kind of easy to judge the character, right? But she goes through so much tumult in the pursuit of romantic relationships with this idea that's so deeply ingrained in her through society, through her upbringing, that once she finds this, or once she lands in it, then she'll truly be happy. And of course, at the end, she realizes, okay, I've had this all along, this really enriched friendship network that completely fulfills me in all of my life. And it's interesting when you watch the actress who portrays Joan, Tracee Ellis Ross, who is kind of like this beacon for like singlehood and finding fulfillment within other things other than romantic love and other than parenthood as well. Like if you know anything about Tracee Ellis Ross, that's pretty much like, the beacon that she's like messaged for. And I'm not trying to like disparage my own or other people's romantic relationship, no. But another thing that also made me think about this, which is quite interesting, is my mother always makes a lot of biblical references, and I also have a twin. So lately she was like, oh, I really want you and your brother's relationship to be like Jonathan and David's relationship. It's just my prayer, like I want you guys to just be as close as them. And so it made me think again about these two characters, and pretty much if you don't know about it, there are these two characters in biblical history who were both men, and their friendship and their relationship is portrayed very beautifully and quite sincerely in the Bible. And so I went back and tried to read about this upon my mother's behest. And it's quite beautiful, actually, even the way that Jonathan's love is described for David. They were friends. But Jonathan's love for David, there was like a line that said, Jonathan loved David as much as he loved himself. And like what a beautiful little like expression of like friendship, and how truly they had each other's back through the end, and Jonathan ends up passing away before David. And pretty much there's this whole chapter, like this monologue of David kind of like going on, about his friendship and how much Jonathan meant to him. And there's a line that really caught me, and once again, because I already have all of these things in my mind, it really sparked something in me, and it made me think again. David says about Jonathan that, like, you're truly like a brother to me, and that your love for me was truly more enriching and greater than the love of women. And I don't know, like, that really was quite touching to me to read that. I don't know, it kind of confirmed this idea that I already had in my mind of how truly our friendships outside of the relationship that we have with ourselves are the most enriching and the most romantic thing actually about life that we'll ever have, you know. And how even when we think about romance and relationships, how truly the greatest romances are kind of formed firstly out of friendship, you know, first, but then also once again have to be introspective, you know, about whether I am a good friend, and how the tenet of being a good friend actually comes to the relationship with yourself. Ultimately, that's what everything always comes down to. Whether you expect friends or you expect yourself to be a compassionate and kind friend, but if you're not that to yourself, it doesn't make sense, you know what I mean? And how, you know, tolerance and forgiveness and kindness are all attributes that make up a great friendship. But if you are not those things firstly to yourself, then there's no way that you can ever be that to someone else. And so for me, when I think back, I think being a good friend is also required a lot of skill. And I do think that that's something I really lacked a lot, especially in my younger years. And so that's why I would describe myself as not having been a very good friend at all. And it's something I still kind of struggle with a lot. But when I look back at like the crux of that and the genesis of that, I really see that actually I had a very tumultuous relationship with myself. And so therefore, by way of that, I could never have been a good friend at all, actually. And so only when I repair the relationship with myself, it sounds cheesy, but it's true, you know, like it's just true. When you repair the relationship with yourself, or when you become more compassionate and less judgmental and more tolerant of yourself, then it's so much easier to extend that to other people. And by way, you just find yourself being a better friend, you know? If your own inner world, your own thoughts are not a place that you want to be, then why would that be a place that anyone else wants to be at, you know? And how this is not only the foundation for a good friendship, but all other kind of relationships as well, whether they are professional or romantic. But yeah, it all starts with the relationship with yourself, and then how then me as well, I have to sort of reframe my mind when it comes to friendships and seeing them as just as pivotal, if not more pivotal and more unchanging and more unconditional than the love I can receive from a romantic relationship, you know? Not to disparage anyone. But I don't know, this is just the things I've been learning about, and it's all stemmed from this one show, Girlfriends, which I've been watching, and it's really good. It's amazing. And also the style and the hair. Oh, the hair is so good in the show. And then the next thing I wanted to talk about actually is this show called Summer Heights High. Actually, a clip I saw on Instagram made me think about this show. It was so big when I was in high school, by the way. Like, Chris Lilly was just so big. He had a bunch of shows on, and I think around that time, 2016, 15, around that era, I think he was like super popular. I never really watched a lot of his things, but I was scrolling Instagram and this one clip came up where his character that he plays, Jonah, Chris Lilly, and there's this one clip where he's kind of like reading out like a letter or something like that, and he's kind of funny because he's like struggling to read it, I guess. But the letter itself, it's actually, I think in the whole show, this one clip is probably the most like touching and most sincere part of the show. Like, it's kind of funny, but it's also very touching. He's pretty much reading out his appreciation to his teacher, Miss Palmer, and how he's basically saying, like, you're a really great teacher and a really important person in my life, and someone who's really encouraged me a lot to like take my literacy seriously. Of course, he's not saying this verbatim, it's like in a funny way, but essentially that's what he's saying. They actually share this like really sincere hug, like in the clip. Anyway, I was expecting to laugh, and then I'm like almost teary-eyed, like watching this clip. And so one, it's made me think a lot about going back and rewatching a lot of those shows, which I have. Summer Heights High, it's funny. Is he cancelled, by the way? I don't know. Like, I know that there's also like a lot of question marks. More than making me want to like rewatch the show and get into Chris Lilly's work, it's made me think a lot more about teachers actually, and the value of teachers in my own life. So I kind of reflected a lot on like, some of my favorite teachers and why they really made an impact on me. And I think really it came down mostly to sincerity. I think more so than anything, you know, you can just tell when someone cares about their job and actually wants to be like a positive impact in people's lives. So now I'm thinking about like teachers and like how much, like when we were younger, they were kind of like this beacon of like outside of like our parents and maybe immediate family. They were kind of like the next best, like next adults in our lives that we would kind of like revere, or certain aspects of like their character, or like kind of look up to them for like guidance and mentorship in a way. And now when you're outside of school, people don't really have that go-to like mentorship anymore in their lives, you know? Could this also be what's contributing to like the ubiquity of AI and sort of our emotional bonds people are forming with AI and these kind of new generative technology now. I've also been watching this show called Couples Therapy. I think a lot of people know about it, but it's pretty much like these real life couples, and you get to like watch this TV show where like they're in real life sessions, they're talking about their real problems and stuff like that. And there was a clip from that show where the guy pretty much, because in his relationship he doesn't feel a lot of that emotional support anymore, so basically he's telling the therapist like, well, I go to AI actually, and I go to AI to tell me that I've done a good job, and I go to AI if I have questions and I need support and mentorship. I like basically type to AI and it gives me like this emotional support, and it's pretty much like the substitute for what he's lacking within his romantic relationship. And so it made me think like, okay, since like we're not really in a school context, we don't really have teachers that like we look up to or like that kind of help us, or and even in our even relationally, people can feel like there's still a gap there. So like maybe that's also maybe the reason why AI, especially this like AI therapy thing, is like really booming. You know what I mean? And it's quite big. And when I studied public relations, we had a project actually where we looked into AI psychosis and did a lot of research about how especially young people who are more vulnerable because they have that kind of relational deficiency and they kind of lack mentorship, how they do then go to these companies and to seek out this kind of emotional support in terms of just not mentorship, but even just about replacing things like friendships and romantic partnership, how people aren't going outside anymore to seek for that, but they're turning to these sort of generative AI tools in order to fill or satiate that kind of need in them, which is kind of scary. And so it made me think a lot then about the importance of teachers, and not just teachers, but like for us, if you're in like not really in a school context anymore, I suppose the next best thing would be like mentors, which even that word itself, I feel like sometimes people feel like, oh, mentor, like, I don't know, Gen Z, like we don't really care about anything or like, I don't know, if we think everything is cringe, we're so scared to be like emotionally vulnerable and stuff like that. So like when we hear words like mentor, I know like it'll be like, okay, mentor, like, because you know how we are. But it made me think a lot about how I think that's what we're missing in society, is like mentors, or like you yourself maybe being a mentor to someone like young, not officially but just like unofficially, like taking that time to actually like talk to people, understand how they feel, and like relationally, I think we need that as people, and we need people who are older, or maybe we revere a certain part of their character, or even professionally we admire like where they're at, or something about the knowledge or something that they have that we like that can be of use and of service, because we all have something to learn. And I feel like that's actually real, and that's actually more sincere and healthy than like going to like AI and being like, hey, I have a problem, or like I have a question about this. And you know what I mean? Especially now politically as well, what's happening in Victoria with how much we completely devalue teachers, I think mentors are really cool. And I think people who have mentors are like interesting and cool, because the fact that people are going to these tools in such massive droves in order to seek emotional support shows that then there is a deficit. And not like, I'm not talking about like therapy, I'm not talking about friendships or anything like that, because those serve a very specific role. But mentors are like someone was like a person that like you revere something about their character, and they're willing to give you that information and help you along your journey for free. You know what I mean? It's not for monetary exchange or anything like that at all. And I think that people who have mentors or kind of some kind of advisors or guidance are actually really cool. And I think it shows that like you're self-evolved and interesting. And I know that sometimes as young people, or especially Gen Z, we can kind of scoff at these things, or maybe think that they're like uncool or anything like that. But I mean, we're talking to AI about our problems. You know what I mean? Like, it's made me think about this book, 36 Children. It's written in the late 60s, and it's pretty much about a teacher and his perspective as he is a new teacher. He's this white man chucked into Harlem, New York in the late 60s. Half of the book is the perspective of the teacher, and half of the book is the perspective of the children. Him being a teacher, his perspective is that I'm not there really to teach them about knowledge so much, or like to pass down like knowledge or metrics, but rather I am just there to be like a beacon to show these kids that there is a world beyond what they know. And he really takes it upon himself to sort of guide these children outside of the walls of the inner city, which are quite rough at that time as well, filled with a lot of emotional neglect and a lot of drugs and violence. And kind of he pretty much takes it upon himself to be this pillar of hope for these kids, but like really like a true mentor to them. And like I said before, I think the crux of this pretty much, or the foundation of his character, Herbert Kohl, is sincerity. I think that we need real life mentors, like made of flesh and bones, who actually have real life experiences and not like generative AI, you know, and like Reddit, you know, like actual people, you know, to like mentor you. And I feel like, one, if you can step in that position of being a mentor, that's great. But if you can also be someone who's mentored, no matter what age you are, I think that that's what's really missing. And I think, yeah, it's really important. All that from Summer High Thai. So thank you, Chris Lilly, because it's been quite an amazing thought exercise as well. Then the last thing I want to talk about was actually an Instagram account. It's about cooking and it's about food. I'm not really much of a cook. I have an interest in food and I like people who cook, but it's a Zimbabwean guy called Tyler Sibindi. Yeah, Sibindi. And pretty much he's into Afro-fusion cooking. So he's of a Zimbabwean background, and pretty much his whole account is about platforming traditional ingredients and native ingredients and native recipes, and kind of infusing them with sort of Western and Eastern techniques, and creating these really beautiful meal experiences. And so what I really like about his account is that he takes a lot of traditional foods, and then he talks about the history of them and where they are found on the land in Zimbabwe, and how then he prepares them, and what's good about them, and how they were used in history by the natives as well, and how he can infuse them in different ingredients and dishes and stuff like that. And I've really been drawn to his account lately because I've been thinking a lot about me and my position as a Zimbabwean, as a Zimbabwean Australian woman, and of course being a diasporan kid, like you always have these different feelings, I'll say, about your cultural identity, and how you're not really like married to either one. Like I'm not really married to the conventional idea of what it means to be Zimbabwean or the conventional idea of what it means to be Aussie. So you're always in flux and you never really know exactly where you fit in. And for me, I think the one way or the two ways I really connect with my Zimbabwean culture a lot, or the times I feel the most Zimbabwean, when I cook the food, which is why I really liked this account, but also when I speak the language as well. And so language is something I'm really thankful that I still speak Shona. And I've been thinking all about this because my grandmother is visiting Australia, and so I've been spending quite a lot of time with her as well. And it's interesting because I actually feel not as Zimbabwean when I'm around her. I see just how Western I am, actually, how thankful I am that I still speak the language and I'm able to really deeply connect with the culture and her in that way. I read this book recently by actually an Australian Zimbabwean author from the 90s. It's called Songs to an African Art. Ugh. Girl, give me a second. Songs to an African Sunset. There we go. Zimbabwean heritage, and then she moves to Australia. She grows up here, and she ends up, marrying an Australian and having an Australian family. But then it's also her journey of like going back home and what that means, and her being Australian and Zimbabwean, and like how these two identities are in flux and constant war with each other. But then she also gets to kind of come to peace with it all at the end of the book. And there was a part of the book that I really liked, and it's at the very, very end, where she talks about how she kind of settles these two dichotomies of her cultural identity. I knew that it was good to be back home, but I had to accept the inevitable. I could never live in the village again. At the end of this weekend, my sisters and I would all climb back into our four-wheel drives and return to Harare. Some of us would then travel to cold, rainy cities in Europe, Australia, or the States, where we would never hear Shona spoken for months on end. Gradually, the village and all its people, myself included, were being swallowed up by modernity. But there is a Shona belief that you will always return to the place where your mother buried a piece of your umbilical cord shortly after your birth. Amai buried mine near the village. I comforted myself with the reassuring thought that however far my journey took me, I would always be connected to this place. I've been wanting to listen to a lot more Zimbabwean music and Zimbabwean TV shows, and just really create a very enriched knowledge and connection to my home country as well, because I feel like that's also another critique that diasporans have, is that like we don't really make much of an effort to be connected to our home country, and there is that kind of perception that like we turn back, on our culture and our language, and that's something that I really want to be truly proud of, and that's something I really want to still be resonant in me, is my Zimbabwean identity. Okay, the last thing I want to talk about are two artists completely on different spectrums. One is Sarah Kinsley. She's a Canadian artist who makes kind of like synth pop, like 80s, like beautiful, romantic, like almost movie-like songs. And she recently released an album kind of recently called Lonely Touch. It's quite good, but I like the piano versions, kind of like slowed down, sort of like really ballad style songs. So I've been listening a lot to those. I've really been liking it. And then the other person I've really been liking, which is completely different spectrum, is actually I've been listening a lot to Skepta, and more so his 2019 album Ignorance is Bliss. It reminds me a lot of my brother. It's an album that like my brother religiously, and I mean religiously, listened to. I don't know, I went back to it, I've been listening to it like every day. It's super gangster, it's super hard, but it's so good. Like it's so good. Like the production, the layering of sounds, his lyricism is amazing. His play on words is awesome, and it's awesome. It's like modern day poetry, I used to perform spoken word, like write spoken word and like perform it, the one where they do this. Yeah, I was like super, I still am like into poetry, and when I listen to his lyricism, it really reminds me of like a lot of like Def Jam poetry, that show that used to be on, and like how it's so clever, like everything about it is so clever. I think that's probably his best work that he's ever done, and yeah, I it's so interesting, but I've really been into it. It's like so hard and gangster. When you're driving, you feel like you're, like you're the coolest person on earth. And his lyricism, man, is so good. And the production of it is so good. Especially the song You Wish. It starts off with like these strings, like violin strings. And then the way he like loops like the bass and the drums on top of it to create like the most hardcore beat you've ever heard, but the base of it is just like violin, like and then the lyricism is like clean and confident and simple, but like just it's good, like it's so good. And the visuals, I really like the visual aesthetic that he made around that whole album as well. It's really cool, it's sick. Yeah, so those are completely two different things, but I've really been liking them both and really enjoying listening to them. And I touched on a lot of things. I don't know if this will make sense. I'm like, oh my god, I'm gonna edit this and be like, what were you even talking about? But I don't know, I still really enjoy putting these out, and it's nice. I'm trying to like exercise articulating myself a lot. And I've also gotten a lot of comments, are you Canadian, are you American? No, I'm Australian. I know I don't have the most conventional Australian accent. I know that. I've been getting this for my whole life. I have a theory. I think something about the TV shows that I watch where I kind of mimic their English. But this is the way I speak, and this is my accent. I'm sorry. Yeah, like I don't know what to tell you. I'm not Canadian. I'm not American. Yeah, it's an Aussie accent. Aussie accents can sound like this. I just get so many comments about it, especially with these videos. So yeah, okay. Anyway, I've been talking for a really long time. Yeah, okay. I'll see you. Bye.